Hey Queen! Today I'm going to talk about the voice in your head. You know, that one that tells you that you can't do it, the one that tells you that you're not good enough, the one that tells you why bother, the one that tells you you've tried this, don't do it anymore, the one that stops you, the one that makes you scared, that voice. Everyone has it. Every single person has that voice. But here's the secret. Here is the key. The key is to make it less loud. How? How does that happen? Well, if you're paying a lot of attention to that negative voice, by the way, that negative voice is not you, it's your ego. If you pay a lot of attention to it, it's super loud. And you may think it's your fear, or you may think it's your intuition, but it isn't. It's not your fear, it's not your intuition, it's your ego. Your ego is stopping you, limiting you. So when you're giving it all of this energy, it gets stronger. But when you take the energy away, it gets weaker. But how does that happen? How do we take the energy away from the ego? Well, I'm going to give you some tips. Number one is identify it. Whenever that voice comes up, make sure you're like, that's not me. If it's like, oh, you can't do this because you don't have whatever, you say, that's not me. You tell it, bye-bye. You tell it, bye-bye, Felicia. You do not listen to it. You do not go down the rabbit hole of stories about why you can't and why you haven't before and blah, 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 because that's what it wants you to do. What you do is you identify it, say goodbye, and keep going. And there may be other times where it pops up and it says the same thing but differently. It says the same thing in a different voice. It says the same thing in a different situation. And it can get pretty tricky. But every time you identify it and you tell it to stop or you tell it goodbye, it gets weaker and weaker and weaker. And then that voice is not so loud. And then that voice is not so frequent. And what happens? You become a stronger person. And now, one thing is the voice, and another thing is being afraid. But being afraid is okay. It's normal. As long as you continue with your life, as long as you're courageous and brave, being afraid is okay. But stopping because of this voice that tells you something that is not true, that's not real, that's not good. And that is how you deal with the negative voice.